Hello, everyone. We have Len with us tonight. And Len, in two sentences, what was your business idea and how does it help the world?
My business idea is that there are millions of small businesses whose owners are 55 and up, and they're starting to think about how to transition out of their companies, and they don't know what to do. So what I do is I help them get themselves and their companies ready.
Excellent. So basically, most of the entrepreneurs start their companies without thinking of selling them. Is that correct?
I would say that's correct, and I don't think that's how it should work. I think you should always start with the end in mind, right? And that's much easier then to work your way back and figure out how do I get there. So, but I would agree with you that vast majority started because they're passionate, but they never really think about what the end game is.
Exactly. But when I was at one accelerator, there was a mentor who said to me, when you're starting the company, start with the mind that you are going to sell it. And it doesn't make sense to me at that point, but at some point it does.
I bet you wish you had, though, right? I bet you wish you had started with the end in mind. Yeah, that's a Stephen Covey, start with the end in mind quote.
Mhm.
And it's really great advice.
So, but what's the difference if you're starting to plan, as you said, you're working with them, starting to plan 2 to 10 years ahead, and what if the owner starts to plan of selling it in 2 months or half a year?
Yeah, when that happens, I have to be really honest with clients and say we're at a fire sale at that point, right? You're not going to be able to get the true value of what you've built over time. And I'll just
Mhm.
give a couple examples of that. The first is most businesses take on average about a year from when they're listed to when they're actually sold. So that already messes up your 3 months, right?
Mhm.
Um, but but the other piece is just a couple other pieces, especially here in the U.S. There are ways to have your business sale tax advantaged. In other words, you may not pay tax on it up front. You may not pay tax on it at all on the gains, but you can't set those things up and immediately get the benefit of them. Some of them need several years before you can implement them.
Mhm.
Another example, this will be my final one, is that if you have some, weirdness in your accounting, in your books, um, typically a potential buyer is looking back 3 years, and if you've got really bad stuff going on, you can't hide it, right? Whereas
Mhm.
if you've got several years, you can say, oh, all right, well, at some point that's going to be off the radar. So those are a couple examples as to why you can't just snap your fingers and sell your business.
Mhm. So, you say roughly 80% of what a buyer pays for is intangible things that don't show up in the books. So, can you give us some examples of those?
Sure. I'll say the biggest one. So there are really four categories. I'll touch on some of the highlights of each, but the
Mhm.
single biggest one is how independent is the business owner from their company. In other words, could the business owner leave without his or her computer and phone for a month and have the business still be succeeding? So that's the biggest intangible that you can't tell from the financial statements. It may look like a well-run company, but
Mhm.
if the owner checks out for a day, the whole thing comes crashing down. That's going to have a huge impact on the value. So that's one piece, is that kind of owner independence from the business. Another is one I've already mentioned, your accounting, right? If your books aren't in order, nothing will ruin the trust faster. And then I'll touch on a couple others. One of the other things that you can't tell from the financial statements is the customer concentration. So, for example, is 80% of your business coming from three customers?
Mhm.
That's a huge risk to a potential buyer, because not only is that concentrated in a few customers, but it's even worse if the relationships are really with the owner. if these are golf buddies of the owner, and when he leaves, that customer has no loyalty anymore.
Mhm.
So, customer concentration. Another one is the revenue recurring or one time.
Mhm.
So people love to buy recurring revenue businesses.
Mhm.
The final one I'll talk about is really related to the culture. So does the do the employees are the employees bought in? Do they believe in what the company's doing, or do they just show up for their paycheck, right?
Mhm.
Because again, if the employees all leave and have a lot of knowledge that isn't written down someplace else, that again is a huge risk to a potential buyer. So those are some of the intangible things that you can't see from the outside.
Mhm. So you mentioned that the owners should move from, I don't know, the operator to a leader who can leave the company. What's the first thing uh, they have to stop doing themselves? And is that usually the thing they are the proudest of?
That can be. So I think this is really hard, right? I don't come in and say this is going to be easy,
Mhm.
because owners love being involved in their businesses. It's what they're passionate about. So that's hard to, you can't just flip a switch. What I recommend they do is what I call the 80% rule. And this is they take a task that they currently do and they assign that to somebody on their team. And they teach them how to do it, but then they get out of the way. And the
Mhm.
80% comes in is if that person can do the job 80% as well as the
Mhm.
owner needs to just let it go, right? And so it's starting with delegating a task. And I actually recommend they don't start with something crucial. I
Mhm.
say they start with something kind of simple, right? And
Mhm.
what that does is once they see that their team is picking up those tasks, then it's going to get easier and easier because there's going to be a confidence level built up. You don't want to start out with the most crucial task first. So that's how I recommend doing it. I will agree with you, though, that sometimes business owners spend the most time on the least valuable tasks, but it's something they care about. So
Mhm.
those are the tough ones to get rid of. But I think it really comes down to, what I said earlier, that if they can't be independent, then nobody's going to want to buy their company, or they're going to want to pay very little for it. So that's some of the motivation. But I would agree with you; it's not easy.
Okay. You spent your basically whole career on the growth side, uh, partnership at Constant Contact, Grasshopper, Repstin, Native, Nextiva, and then at some point you went on your own and started helping others leave, owners leave their companies. What made you switch sides?
Well, first, there's an interesting piece in all the companies that you mentioned. Almost entirely, they focused on small businesses as their customers. So if you think about Intuit, Constant Contact, Grasshopper, they all had small businesses as their main component of client. So I interacted with thousands of businesses over my career. So even though I was on doing partnerships and doing growth, I was interacting with a lot of small businesses. And I also grew up in a small business, which I think has something to do with it. So I saw what it was like to run one. And my parents owned a business that was, you know, 24/7, right? It operated constantly. And so I saw that. I know what it takes. And so
Mhm.
when I kind of got tired of the corporate thing, I knew I was going to go help small businesses. And it was really fortuitous as to how I got into exit planning. It was an early client who was 72 years old, and her husband had died, and they had run a business for 50 years, and she was really just at a loss as to how to preserve the legacy. And so by helping her do that, it really kind of got me right here. And I
Mhm.
decided that that was going to be my focus, is helping business owners, because again, most of them have run their businesses for so long. Uh, and so nobody ever teaches you how to get ready to exit. There are lots
Mhm.
of places to learn how to start and grow, not many to help you exit.
Excellent. So basically, this new vision finds you without.
It really did.
Yeah.
It really did. It was not my intent. My intent was just to be a general business coach and help, help businesses kind of move on to that next level. And this one client really changed my mind.
Mhm. So, what surprised you the most in this journey? Um, in the difference between corporate world and this small business world?
So the biggest surprise to me, or the biggest difference to me, is that in corporate, I used to joke that as the company got bigger, your title got longer and your area of influence got smaller, right? And so
Okay.
the exact opposite is typically the case in a small business. You have a really short title, but really broad responsibilities. So I think that's one of the biggest things to me. And the other is that, um, and this gets back to that the owner independence, is that because owners typically have such a broad range of responsibilities, they tend not to do a great job of focusing on what's the most important. And so one of the things that I really do with business owners is say, what activities do you do that have the highest value? And so if you could put a dollar amount on each of them, right? And what I'll find is there are activities they're doing that are worth $500 an hour, and there are activities they're doing that are worth $5 an hour. And so what I try to say is get rid of those $5 an hour things, focus on the 500. You're going to have less stress. You're going to make more money, and your company's ultimately going to be valuable because, as you mentioned, you're out of that operator role and into
Mhm.
that kind of leader guider role. So that's the biggest change to me, is that, when I was in corporate, you had your tasks and you were focused on them, and in a small business, everything could be your task as the owner.
Absolutely. Is that the hardest task or conversation of you as a coach or consultant, to show them that they should uh, let go that $5 tasks and concentrate on 500?
It typically is, because again, this is not a generalization, but some business owners prefer to fight fires, right? They
Mhm.
love to be involved and needed,
Mhm.
even though it may be low value tasks and it may be burning out their team. That's just some people are driven that way. And so that's something to really, I struggle with them to let go of. But the biggest piece is I try to get the owners to focus. And part of this comes back to those intangibles that you talked about, or that we talked about earlier. Potential buyers care more about predictable profit growth than they do about revenue growth,
Mhm.
because revenue is easy to generate sometimes at a
Mhm.
loss, right? So one of the things I really try and have business owners do is, what are the products or the services that you're really good at and that
Mhm.
you are profitable for you? And they'll say this and that one, and I'll say which ones aren't so profitable, and they'll note those as well. And I'll say, well, how about if you get rid of those? How about if you just stop supporting that?
Mhm.
And it's freeing to have somebody else tell them. And I do the same to them with customers. I say, tell me about some of your customers. Well, this guy's really a pain, but he's been with us forever. Sorry, it sounds harsh, but fire him, because a buyer doesn't want to inherit
Mhm.
a customer who's a pain. So,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on that? Do you have opinions?
Ab- Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's usually hard, because if it wouldn't be hard, they would fire him long ago.
Right,
You
right.
know, because if they are sticking to the pain in the ass customer, there should be some reason. and it's usually, I don't know if they know him or they're with them for so long, or they were one of their first customers and they're still somehow emotionally attached to them and things like that. But yes, absolutely, this is business and you have to act like businessmen.
And I completely, those are the exact scenarios as you describe them. A lot of times it's early, it's an early customer, and I say, oh, great, but you've moved on, and you need to focus on the people that are going to help you grow your business.
Okay, let's start a bit about starting a business, because the podcast name is Ideas Are Cheap, and I'm usually talking and asking entrepreneurs about their experience with this, because I think it's the best time ever in history to start a business. What do you think about that?
I would agree, and partially, there are a couple factors at play here. One is clearly AI, right? AI allows you to do a lot of things yourself that you used to have to pay other people for. The other thing I see is, the rise of virtual assistants, right, and outsourced resources. So for those things that AI can't do, you can find other ways rather than hiring yourself. So those two things in concert with each other, I think, make it a great time to start a new business. Um, the one caveat I will say is, technology applied to the wrong problem doesn't doesn't do you any. It just messes it up faster. So there still need to be great ideas, but I think going from the idea stage to the implementation stage has gotten so much faster and
Mhm.
so much easier and so much cheaper that
Mhm.
it is a great time to start something new, and people are doing it, and they're taking their hobbies sometimes and turning it into a business, which I think is great. And I just think that um, the possibilities are endless, but you still, just like I talk about, you need that focus, right? You can't do everything. Focus
Mhm.
on what you're really good at, build that up, and then expand from there. So that's my take on the environment today.
Excellent. And I would add that with all the social media, you can test your idea or implementation fast and advertise it fast and cheap. Uh, so it's really good uh, time for being entrepreneur. Uh, okay, let's go back to your business. How do people find you? How do they approach you? How does working with you look like? How do you start? How much of their, I don't know, time and energy do you take, and what do they have to do to, I don't know, do they have some exact steps, or how does it look like?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with how do clients come to me, and I will go on record as saying I will never buy Google AdWords. Because in my business, it's really built on somebody knowing me, liking me, and trusting me, right? So that leads to vast majority of my business is through referrals. It's
Mhm.
through the people I've worked with over time who I don't expect to be my clients, but it's their friends, their family, and then a strong network of strategic partners. So it's people who are working with business owners at that same phase, right? That might be business lawyers or estate planners or life coaches, maybe, or accountants. So they are my best source of referrals. Um, and again, that comes with they know me, so it's a much smoother introduction than me trying to be anything and everything to on the internet. In terms of how I work with clients, I have a 3-step process that I work with.
Mhm.
The first step is I do a valuation of the business, and I basically say, based on the tangibles, based on 3 years of financial statements and my interview with you, here's what I think your business is worth today.
Mhm.
And that is usually only takes a couple hours of time on the part of the business owner. And the idea isn't that this is what you could sell your company for today necessarily, but it's really kind of based on the fundamentals of your business. What is it? What is that line in the sand that we're drawing today?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say many times that number is disappointing to business owners.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, it doesn't matter how hard you worked. It doesn't matter, how much you sweat you put into the business. A buyer just doesn't care. They care about the the growth potential. So that's phase one, is the valuation. Step two, phase two, is what I call the evaluation stage. And in this step, I go through about 40 factors that either increase or decrease the value of a company. So these are things I've talked about: owner independence, customer concentration. And this is a interview. So it tends to take 5 to 6 hours of me asking these questions and then going a little bit deeper. And again, it's a flat fee I charge for that. I don't, so it's not this ongoing. And at the end of that, I deliver the client a blueprint to say, these are the things that are impacting your valuation, the worst or the worst impacts. And I deliver that as, here are the reds, the yellows, and the greens.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do that, I say, if you want to go and work on these yourself, we're done, right? If you want my help implementing some of the changes necessary, then we go to a month-to-month coaching basis.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very specific of valuation, evaluation, and then implementation is that third phase. And that can go from a few months to a few years. It all depends on, what the business owner needs help with. And just to be clear, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a lawyer. So there are things where I'm saying, you need help here. That's not my expertise, but I can point you to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of exit planning as a team
Mm-hmm.
effort, right? It's not just me, but they need to be working with their financial planner and others in their sphere of influence. So that's how I work with clients. And the one piece I'll go back to is that evaluation stage where I ask some pretty tough questions. That's really a precursor to due diligence when you
Mm-hmm.
get to that phase. Because what I'm shooting for is that every question that a potential buyer is going to ask, I've already asked you. And some of those questions, some of those answers aren't pleasant, but you've got them all out there. You know what we can impact. And there are some things definitely where you just say, you know what, I understand it's a flaw. I didn't fix it, and you just have to be okay with that. But
Mm-hmm.
that serves a lot of value later on because you've answered the tough questions already.
Is it actually good to be bad at phase two because you can improve vastly in phase three?
With time, right?
Yeah, yeah,
This is the thing where if I say, you've got bad accounting and and then you tell me you want to sell in 30 days, I say, well, you're going to have bad accounting then. But
mm-hmm.
you're right. It the whole goal of that evaluation stage is to say, what do you look like from the outside?
Mm-hmm.
Which a lot of business owners don't think about. They tend to focus on running their day to day, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But when it does come time to exit, you need to know what you look like from the outside.
What are, I don't know, the most common mistakes that companies does but are easy fixable?
So I think one of the easiest fixes, and this is another thing that with technology has gotten significantly easier, is documenting the processes needed to run the business. So this was another one. In big companies, you had the binders with all the processes, written down. In many small businesses, it's all up here in the owner's head, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the really quick things to do is to document how the business runs. What does this do? Owner independence, right? It also, if employees are doing that, it means that no employee is too important to leave, right? So, and where that's gotten so much easier now is it used to be you had to sit and write all that down. Now you fire up a Loom video or even a Zoom session and you say, okay, I'm going to walk through the accounts receivable process. I do this and then I do that in 10 minutes, you're done, right? And it's live. So I think documenting processes is a really quick win. for a lot of businesses because, again, most of them, it tends to live in people's heads.
Mhm.
The other one is that focus idea, right? Like getting rid of products or services that just are not going to lead anywhere positive,
Mhm.
shedding some of the clients that are a pain in the ass, and to use your term. Those are some relatively quick fixes. The harder ones are some of those letting go of favorite tasks, but in time, those all happen. And again, they build on each other. Once the business owner has that reduced level of stress by letting go of some things, it gets easier.
Excellent. So, what was the best business advice you received?
Oh, so it came from an old boss of mine. This guy, his name is was Bill Campbell. He was a legend in Silicon Valley. But before working at Apple and Go, he was a football coach
Mhm.
at Boston College and at Columbia. And I worked for him when I was at Intuit. And his best business advice to me was, in a American football term, even if you don't know who to hit, go hit someone.
Good one.
And what it gets down to is done is better than perfect, right? Test, learn. There are very few tests that you can do that are going to destroy you, right?
Mhm.
But you need to keep learning and keep trying new things because there are very few eureka moments. It tends to just be this slow grind to get to make progress. So, the paraphrase of "just hit someone" was the best business advice I ever got because just from a personality perspective, I tend to want to have things be perfect.
Mhm.
So for me, it really is think back to just hit someone when I'm doing the 15th edit on an email. Uh, so
Good one.
that's
Yeah.
that's my what's yours? Can I ask you what was your
Yeah,
go?
absolutely, absolutely. Mine was when I was asking one of my coaches for my client because I didn't know much about YouTube and he wanted to grow on YouTube and he said, "Okay, the best. My advice is your first 100 videos will suck." And I thought at the beginning that's a creepy advice, but actually, when I thought about this is quite uh, similar to yours because you have to do the repetition and be prepared to fail a lot. Before you will be good at something, and don't want to start with one perfect video because you will not do it until you learn it. So starts doing it and start publishing and it will come to the place.
Yeah, so I think the advice is actually very similar, right? Which is go out there, do something, test. The biggest piece to it is don't just test randomly. Understand what you're trying to test, and then learn from that and evolve it. Because testing without any parameters is kind of a waste of time, right? You have to know what you're trying to prove or disprove, and once you do that, then you can make progress. So I love that. I love that your first 100 will not be good.
Yeah. So what is your advice to somebody if they come to you?
My biggest advice is to start early, right? And there are people who come to me and say, well, I'm not planning to sell for 10 years, and I say, okay, that's great. But I ask them one question. I say, if somebody walked in the door of your business physically or whatever, metaphorically, and they said, I want to buy your company today, what would you tell them? Would you be absolutely prepared to do that? And most will say, yes, of course. And then I say, oh, okay, so everything's documented, the process is documented. You can leave tomorrow.
No.
No, I can't. Right. So, so that question is really revealing to me. And it should be, you should be able to answer yes, right? At any point in time. Again, You may not plan to leave for your business for 10 years, but if somebody walked in tomorrow and said, I want to buy it for $20 million, you'd want to be ready. And you wouldn't want to say, come back in 2 years, because they will never come back. So that's a piece of advice that I give, which is, exit planning doesn't just, and it's not all about the end result. It's about the time in between as well. And if your business is running better, if you are making more money and working less and are less stressed, that's a huge win. And why not do that sooner rather than later?
Yeah. And it also helps you with running business day to day. So it's wise to do it anyway.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. If you can delegate more tasks, A, you're less stressed as the owner, but B, now your employees are more bought in, right? They've got more responsibility. They are excited about being there, as opposed to just being task focused without any real ownership. If you're giving them more responsibility, they're going to want to come into work more, right? So there are all these benefits. And again, I talked about it earlier. You may set up things from a tax perspective that ultimately benefit you, but can benefit you in the short term as well. Things that you implement. So it's just a great thing to spend some effort on, to be ready at any point in time.
So if you would give an advice to your younger self, would you do something different with your career?
I had a great corporate career. The advice I would give to myself is, don't work so much. Right. So, I have two kids who are now adults. And back when they were little, I probably worked way too much and didn't realize that nobody else noticed. Right. So I think it would be, my advice wouldn't be work less. My advice would be, figure out what's really important and focus on that. So it's a lot of what I now teach to business owners. Yes, you could be busy 20 hours a day, but does it really matter? And so focus on those things that have the greatest impact, and then be okay with being done.
Excellent. And my last question, what would you say is the most rewarding part of being an entrepreneur?
Oh, for me, the rewarding part is one, the impact I have on my clients and helping them through this process. One of my clients joked that they were ready for their counseling session with Len, right? But it really, having them then get to the finish line, right, to sell their business, and seeing the positive impact that had on their life. I'll tell one quick story. I play ice hockey early in the morning, and I had a client who used to bring his phone on the bench with him at 6:30 in the morning, because he was the only one that could answer those questions. And he said, I'm thinking of selling this. He owns another business as well, but he said, I'm thinking of selling this business. And I said to him, my goal is that you no longer bring your phone on the bench.
Yeah.
And so we worked on some things. We got his business ready for sale. He sold it. He now owns only the one business, and he doesn't bring his phone on the bench. Right. So to me, that was a huge sense of satisfaction, in that I get to see really significant life changes in the lives of small business owners who have spent years and years building their business, and to see them get the fruits of their labor is really rewarding. So that, to me, is one of the best parts of being an entrepreneur, is that I can choose that, and I can choose who my clients are, as opposed to, a lot of times corporate, it's, you will do this now. I make those decisions, right? So that's what I would say is my my greatest benefit of being an entrepreneur.
Well, Thank you. It was a lovely talk. I think we covered a lot of interesting questions. You shared a lot of wisdom. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thought would be start thinking about this. You don't have to hire me today. I can't deal with everybody, right? But just start to think about your business. Just spend 15 minutes and think about where you want it to end up. That would be my parting advice: is if you can just figure out where you want to go, the path there is going to get a lot clearer. And so take that time. I think it would be really valuable for every business owner who's listening to set aside some time to think about where they want their business to end
Well, thank you, and great advice for for the end.
up. Awesome. Thank you, Robert, for the questions. I appreciate it.
Goodbye.
All right. Bye bye.